Well, costuming is one of those things that has been around for thousands of years. Go back to the Romans, go back to the Greeks, go back to, it's always been around. It's dressing up has always been something that historically is a part of our psyche, our character development. And in children, it's even better.
I agree.
Yeah.
So it's when you talk about dressing up, you're referring to like ceremonial
Right.
clothing and the way that that impacts the human experience. One of those things about enclothed cognition that we've talked about before is that when we dress up in things that give us a sense of power, they can physically affect our well-being. One of the studies actually showed that men wearing a suit would increase their testosterone by 20%. Now, it's a physical change. That's a physical change to their bodies and
to their body chemistry as well as to the brain
Right.
and its activity.
right.
So,
And then that's a little bit more difficult to measure. But one of the things that I always thought was interesting is I don't think we fully understood it. I think we subconsciously understood the power that clothing can give us. But across cultures, you'll see this, where with like Native Americans and their ceremonial garb, it's extremely important in the culture. And dressing up in it, wearing it, and participating in their ceremonies is such an impactful thing for
Right.
them as a culture and for them as an individual. And that, to them, that ceremonial garb is the power suit, right? And so it's with with costumes in general, it's one of those things that the more we recognize the impact that our clothing has on us, the communication that it has to the people around us, as well as to our own bodies and our own psyche, the more we can really start to utilize that part of humanity.
So, a costume to me is so much more. It signifies an inner self that maybe we wouldn't be able to express unless we have the costume on. It enables people actually to communicate more openly.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about enclothed cognition and how a superhero t-shirt makes people feel more confident, they are actually more charismatic. They actually feel stronger and smarter when they wear it. I think a costume does the same thing for the wearer. It makes them feel, again, that uninhibited feeling, but also stronger and more charismatic, more confident. So a costume is, and if you don't believe it, just watch somebody put on a costume and change. I mean, little children change when they put on a costume. They become the character.
They do.
And that's what it's about. It's about watching that child change, where they gain the confidence and they feel stronger and braver, and you watch them stand taller and more assured of themselves. It's empowering and it's beautiful, especially in children.
Whatever you do today, do it with the confidence of a 4-year-old in a Batman t-shirt.
Right?
Right. It makes a massive impact on our psyche, and on our subconscious when we're wearing something that makes us feel empowered. And with children, we're trying to accomplish that with them writing their story of the hero they see in themselves. So instead of picking someone else's character from, say, Marvel or DC or one of these different fandoms, they get to choose themselves. They get to be themselves as they want it. And we had one little boy we talked to, and we asked him, if you could be anything, what would you be? And he says, I'd be a villain because the villains have the best costumes. And when we said, well, but Bud, you could literally design your costume, the look on his face was, wait.
Yeah, the only reason he wanted to be the villain was because he thought their costumes were better. But once he discovered he could design his own costume,
right,
it was a whole different story. It was like, okay.
Yeah. So he once he wrapped his head around that, it was more like, well, maybe I don't want to be the villain then. Maybe I want to be the superhero. And that's part of that mentality that we're trying to help these kids that have gone through this trauma, is to help them sit and see themselves differently than what they've been seeing themselves as up to that point because of the trauma.
Well, and once they grasp the concept of they could be anything and they get to choose what it is they're going to be, you can just see their minds start wondering on what their garb is. What are they going to wear? What is their costume or uniform? Or I would think, our little princesses want princess gowns. And once they decide what their princess gown is going to be, what color it's going to be, whether it's going to be sparkly, whether it's going to be full, or whether it's going to, you can see them start to imagine all of the things possible. And all of a sudden, it's like with Alex, he loved the cape from this superhero, and he loved the helmet from that superhero, and he loved the costume from that superhero, and he liked things about this costume that he wanted. And so we took all those elements in and we made them his, to what he wanted, and they became his own elements. And so
they inspired his costume, but he didn't have to pick any one costume that was ever made and be like, well, that's what I've got to wear.
Right.
The way it is, he got to reimagine all of his favorites into his own costume. And took some elements that were just his, that were a million times better than all the rest. So
especially since he got to design them, because once he realized I get to design it, it gets to be how I want it to look, not how that looks or how that looks, but how I want it to look. Then it empowers again. So there's that step of empowering children again. There's so many facets that through what Figmentation does that allows these children to become empowered.
That's the whole point. And the costume helps them do that because they let their guard down in the costume to the degree of they forget everything that they've gone through before. They forget all of those feelings. And in that moment, they're just themselves in their costume. So all of the baggage that they've been carrying around, like Jacob Marley and his chains, have all melted away, and they're just in their costume. They get to just be themselves without all the baggage in that moment. And that helps them to step outside of that whole situation that they've gone through and see it for what it is, which is the struggle that made you who you are now, but it's not the end of your story. Let's write your story. Right. And this is just the beginning. This is just the origin story. What are you going to do with the rest of your life?
Right.
And so it's these costumes really help them kind of unlock their brains and
anything
settle
is possible.
into it.
Yeah. At that point, anything is possible
because it's they got to imagine it, and so now it's like, wow, what? So if I imagine that I'm in outer space, I can be in outer space. Yeah, we're gonna make that happen.
Yeah.
And well, I can ride a T-Rex. Yeah, we're gonna make that happen. I'm on board with whatever you want to be, whatever you imagine yourself to be. And you're going to have people who look at imagination and they think that imagination is not, maybe not what is the best route out. But for a child, it has to be. They have to be able to imagine the world different than the trauma that they've lived through.
And they can do that through pretend play, which is their story, which they get to live vicariously through, is how they write in their story. With Alex, he made himself a super genius because he wants to overcome feelings of doubt and fear. And so if he was a super genius, he was smart, you see, and could handle things. And even though he already was incredibly smart, it overcame the doubts he had. So
there was some negative self-talk there. And one of the things that what this did for Alex was that I watched his little brain stop talking to himself in the ways that he was. There were several moments where he was talking to himself very negatively, and the more he acted out as the superhero, the more the negative self-talk stopped.
Well, and most negative self-talk is fear. It's overcoming fears that they have. I'm afraid of being looked at a certain way or being bullied for a certain thing, and so it's overcoming those fears. So it really is, every step of a Figmentation is empowering a child,
right?
Giving them back something that they've lost. And the best way to give them back innocence is through pretend, is through play, where they can imagine themselves being stronger, braver, running faster, flying, riding a T-Rex.
when we were first coming up with this concept, I had my son kind of mock out what he would look like if he did a figmentation. And my son's obsessed with astronomy. And he wrote this story that was so imaginative. And I had no idea that was in his brain. I had no idea, because my kids play video games. I'm not a no screen time mom. And so I kind of expected him to imagine along the lines of all the favorite movies he's seen. And instead, he was just way out in right field of I want to be this meteor collector. Wanted to be a collector, not a hunter. He didn't like that word. He wanted to collect them, not hunt for them. And so he was just this like really creative story about, I want to be in outer space, and I want to go through a black hole, and I want to save this planet. And by the way, the monsters that are in this one planet come out of the swamp like they were lily pads, red lily pads, and they had their mouth open like a Venus flytrap. That's how he described it. Anyways, and he went on this story about what he wanted to be. And it was so imaginative. And all I could think of is, how do we shoot that shot? How do we make that happen? And thankfully, we have experts that help us with that, because there's a lot of things that we don't know. We're the child advocates. That's what we do and what we push for. But it takes an entire crew to make a child's movie, and they have as much fun as we have.
Right. Yeah. Well, and again, the more stories, when we did our writing contest and we got to read children's stories and their imaginations, and trust me, it's a huge broad spectrum of imaginations that we didn't even, there's, you tell yourself what you think little children are going to be. Little girls want to be princesses, or little boys that want to be rock climbers or famous baseball players, or, something like that. But it really is, all of them were amazing superheroes and amazing imaginative worlds, and it was just so
we had one of our stories in the writing contest was a little girl who had a cat best friend, and they had to save Cat Town together from the giant villain that was a waffle. And they did this with syrup, with maple syrup. I laughed so hard reading that story. I was like,
it was great.
Oh gosh, can you imagine making that into a movie?
Right.
It just this giant animated waffle, or would we do miniatures? And how would we make this happen so that this little girl could see herself as the great waffle defeater of Cat Town, right? And it's just, oh my gosh. It was so funny. And so it's all of this is about making their imagination come to life, and however they imagine themselves to be, because that's where they find their potential.
Yep.
They don't find their potential in other people's stories. They don't find their potential in other people's costumes. They don't find their potential.
No, in fact, what they get through other people's stories is they just get to use their imagination to try to put themselves in that story. But the potential comes from it being their own story.
Right.
And it's a completely different...
Sorry, I'll let you finish.
It's okay. It's a completely different process in the brain.
Right.
Where you could see where having a potential and fulfilling that potential through their own imagination, how that creates healing and growth, where not living vicariously through somebody else's imagination, which is just takes imagination. So this is actually building.
Right.
Well,
it's a kickstart. What it does is it makes them think to themselves, I can imagine more than what I've been because I just did it. I lived through it. It turned out great. And so then they think to themselves, okay, well, then I can imagine myself as going to the moon. I can imagine myself as an astronaut. And you work towards that goal, because now you know that once you've imagined it, all it takes is for you to do it.
Just do it.
Just do it. Make it happen.
Yeah.
And don't give up, because yes, a superhero's life is hard.
Yeah.
There's a lot of challenges in a superhero's life. Right. They have to face and overcome things that maybe the average person doesn't have to. But you get to be that superhero, and all you have to do is move forward with your life. And it doesn't have to be a superhero. Listen, their stories do not have to be capes and synthetic scorpion venom. They can be a hero in their story however they want to be. If their hero is living peacefully on a farm somewhere in the woods, that's fine. That's fine. I'm happy with that. Whatever they see their potential as, something that they can work towards that isn't stagnating in their trauma.
Well, Kelsey wanted to be a queen. So a queen. Queens have to run a kingdom, and there's problems, and problems have to be solved, and they're the hero when they solve the problems of the kingdom. So it's,
You know, with kids, they find their passions very differently than an adult would, and to push them forward, to give them the momentum to stop sitting in their trauma and reliving it over and over again, but to move forward from trauma. To move forward from trauma, if you've ever been through anything traumatic, and most people have, especially by the time you get to be my age, you've lived through something.
yeah.
As a child, you should never have to.
Well, and as a child, with their kind of imagination, they're not limited. As we grow into adulthood, we start to pick the things we like. We start to find the world. And so if it's something that doesn't interest us, we just brush it aside. But with a child, anything's possible. Their brain is still developing and growing, and they can still see the possibility in anything. They haven't really developed their likes and dislikes to a certain degree. I mean, especially to the core, like adults get to a point where we know we don't like that, so we're not even interested in it. We walk away. Where a child, I'm not sure yet.
It's
I haven't
infinite.
experienced it yet. Yeah. And
The world is as infinite as their mind is.
Yeah.
And they see potential in everything. Rain is fascinating. Yeah. Whereas we adults, we take that for granted after a while. And it's annoying. It's in my way. It's inconvenient. I don't want to deal with
mud.
I hate the mud.
Hate the mud.
And your child is like, Mom, come see this.
Come play in the mud.
Look at the mud on my hands. Want me to touch you?
Yeah.
And you're just like, no, don't touch me, kid. Get away from me. And so the kids have I wish I could be more like my children in that sense of the wonder and the magic and the world's potential. And so we have this opportunity with kids that have been through awful things to help them see the world the way they saw it before. Because we as adults, we need to see it that way. We need the world to be the wonder that it was when we were children, because children are innocent, and they don't judge, and they don't abuse, and they don't until they're taught it.
We need them to experience the wonder the way we did when we were little. And so a child that's had that taken away because of something that's happened early on is kind of robbed of something special. I mean, we want it for our children. When we raise our children, we want them to have the magic of Christmas and the magic of holidays and the magic of pretend play and a tooth fairy. And, we want our children to experience that. But when a child's childhood has been disrupted and they lose some of that, that's not fair. So
it's not fair.
And we need to give it back.
Well,
we need to help.
The world needs it.
Yeah.
The world needs it. And we start with the kids, because giving them back their childhood so that they're not reacting out of their trauma, but they're responding to the world because they understand that trauma is not the defining feature of the world. Because what happens with them when they experience that trauma, now everything else is defined by that. Everything is defined by the moment that trauma happened.
Right. You were talking about Alex as being that little boy that was diagnosed with this illness, and now everybody will see him as Scorpiation.
Right. He's the scorpion superhero.
Right.
He's not his illness. He was never his illness.
No.
But the people around him would... It's not uncommon in conversation to pick that one defining feature about somebody when their name isn't the defining feature. You know? Right. So maybe 3 or 4 Alexes. So it's Alex with the diagnosis, and it's not fair to Alex to define him that way, because you're going to look at him and you're going to think that he's capable of less. And I know that little boy, and he is not capable of less. He's capable of more.
Right.
He can do so much with that. He's got empathy for people that he wanted to save his best friend. That was his goal in his movie. He didn't want to defeat the villain. He wanted to save his best friend.
Yeah.
And he did that because he had empathy for people that are going through something, because he's been through something.
Right.
And there is nothing like life experience. I've been trying to teach my teenagers this lately. They will now that they're starting to have to buy things for themselves, and the reality of that life experience that they're gaining, and they knew it logically, but they didn't understand it experientially. And so when they go through this with that experience, they have this extra layer. So a child who's been through trauma has an extra layer of experience that they should not have to have, but we didn't get to decide that.
Right.
But we can help them use it.
Right.
For the superhero mentality, for the greater good of themselves first. Yeah. And then from that full cup, can they pour to the rest of the world around them? Because now that's become who they are. But they're not defined by their trauma.
No.
They're defined by their potential.
Exactly.
There's so much more to who they are, and they can go out and change the world. I firmly believe that these kids are the best thing that could ever happen to the world. And that's no pressure on any child, by the way.
I agree. I think in the process of helping these little kids gain back some of their innocence and some of the wonderment of childhood, and teaching them their potential through a different perspective of how do they play the role of hero, it will not only benefit the child immensely, but it's going to benefit everybody involved, as well as the community around them, as well as them and their participation for the rest of their life within that community. And the adults that work with these children, the benefits are immense in the goodness that it does for others. So yeah, it's
very contagious.
It is incredibly.
It's very contagious. Once they start to wrap their heads around their potential, and they stop looking at themselves as the traumatic thing that happened to them, they see the world as so much more. It's so sad to watch a child who's been through trauma, who's just sees themselves as that. That's all they are now. Well, they're two-dimensional in their minds from that point forward, unless they're given some help that helps them to see past that. And so one of the things that Figmentation does is we're just helping you to see past.
Well, and let's say a child that receives a diagnosis that comes out of, nowhere, whether it's critical illness or some other type of diagnosis that will go with them for life, it changes everything, not just for the child, but for everybody around the child. And the child feels that. There's a burden there that's put on not the child or the diagnosis, but the life change that becomes something, and the child feels that. And sometimes their whole world can become the next doctor's appointment, and keeping them entertained while they undergo tests, or while they're, and they don't really understand what's going on. There's a lot of adults talking and explaining, and they don't really know. And so they really can become defined by what happened or what is going on, and lose who the child is in the process. And so we just want to wake that back up and bring it back to the surface, and let everybody see that doctor's appointments are just something that everybody has to deal with. And things like that happen to a lot of people, and that you're still you, and who you are is still absolutely amazing, and so.
Well, we give them a different definition.
Absolutely.
Actually, we don't give it to them.
They give it to themselves.
It's there.
Yeah,
it's there all along, and we just help them. We just help them unlock the door and be that person again.
Yeah, and find their hero,
so that they can make the rest of their life as heroic and kind and
creative
and innovative and
as possible. Yeah,
so that they can be the best versions of themselves. And we love it.
And influence everybody around them.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us on the Figmentation Podcast. Join us again.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye.